There are many tools you can use for footprinting, but let's just take a look at a few of them. We could use Maltego. Now Maltego, this is a really interesting program, and it's not easy to use in the beginning. You have to spend some time learning to use it. But it finds relationships, and it finds links between people and groups and companies and organizations and websites and internet infrastructure and phrases and documents and files. And Maltego has been used successfully to trace back the originators of denial of service attacks and other sorts of attacks on the internet. Because it'll be like, okay, this IP, which is associated with this region, which has these groups, which has those emails, which has, and it just spreads out like that. And when you look, here's just sort of an example of Maltego. It's something that is very worthwhile to take a look at, but you can see all of the relationships here between IP addresses and website names and people and email addresses. Very, very interesting way. And it does all of this lookup information. ReconNG, another tool. It has a variety of modules. It interacts with various databases. It has a lot of functions. And it does web-based reconnaissance. Now, the way ReconNG actually works is you get API keys from various sites like Google and Shodan and LinkedIn. API key is simply just an identifier to identify your application that is directly accessing the functionality of these big sites. And you can request these API keys. Some sites are free. And you can load it, and ReconNG can then pretend like it is a developer application that is requesting this information directly rather than going to the web interface like a normal user would. And so ReconNG, here's an example here. Let me just zoom in so you can take a look here. I set a source, sans.org, and I ran it, and you can see that right off the bat it's coming up with information here. And so it can even find vulnerabilities. And look at this. I mean, so here are some cross-site scripting vulnerabilities discovered. And it even references where they're from and whether the status is fixed or unfixed. Wow, sans.org. How can you have two cross-site scripting vulnerabilities? So anyway, ReconNG, really, really cool that way to get all sorts of information. Another one is something called FOCA. Now, FOCA is a Windows-based tool, and you have to really hunt around for it to get the Windows version. It's actually, there's a project there that you can download like source code and stuff. But the Windows version, you simply use it, and it will try to get metadata out of documents from websites, like out of Word and Office documents, to try to identify things like authors and people. And so FOCA does that. It's a tool. It tries to get metadata and hidden information out of documents that are available on the internet. You can use that to do network analysis, DNS searches, fingerprinting, searching directories, etc. for different attack types. So here's an example of FOCA in use right here. So you can see that we went to some location, like here's an example of the BBC. We can see the network, the domains, the roles, vulnerabilities, metadata. We can see like there's some 654 .doc documents, 8 docx, almost 2,000 PDFs, a few that aren't even known. A bunch of users were extracted out of these things. Folder information, printers, software information was all extracted out of all of this stuff. You have to be patient with these tools and give them time to finish their job. Another one, Netcraft. So this is actually, it's a legitimate company. They provide anti-fraud, anti-phishing services and security, internet security and data mining services. But you can use that information also. They'll do application testing and PCI scanning for compliance and internet analysis. They'll show the market share of web servers and operating systems and hosting providers and SSL certificate authorities as well. So here's an example of Netcraft. We can look here and we can see the top 50 fishiest top-level domains based on phishing incidents to site ratio. .llc. There's a TLD called .llc. That's interesting. know all these others. Wow, .llc. So we can see that by just in this one thing, we can see of the countries, the Gambia has the most, the highest per capita incidence. The Gambia is a tiny little country in Africa. Highest per capita incidence of phishing. That's interesting. Followed by Macedonia, Senegal, Zimbabwe, Qatar, Uganda, Malta, Rwanda. That's interesting. So this is just looking at Netcraft, just one of their functionalities here. You can see that this part here is only about phishing and fraud, but there's other functionality they provide as well. Shodan.io. Oh, I love this one. Now, Shodan.io, their whole thing is to crawl the internet and find what's attached. And they'll find cameras and industrial control systems and Internet of Things and all sorts of stuff besides just websites. And they'll give all the information, including the link to it. So if we saw some cameras and we wanted to try to break into the cameras and do some observation, I gotta warn you, you can't unsee sometimes the things that you see, okay? So, I mean, because you can be looking in people's homes, looking in stores, looking at like surveillance cameras. It's just amazing. And from hour to hour, what you see will be different. So if you see something interesting, make sure that you copy the link to that particular device. So these are devices that were never locked down, or they just left the username and password admin, and you can try to break into them. So like you put in search terms like VoIP or VPN or webcam XP. And here's a real live example. So here is what looks like and this was at night, so I'm sorry it's grainy. This looks like a little restaurant. You can see the little tables and chairs here. You can see behind the counter, and you can see different views of the camera. Look at this, the pan, tilt, zoom controls of the camera right here. So, and one time I was looking at it, and it was like a street surveillance thing. It was obviously high up, and it was panning slowly back and forth. It was clear someone else was already looking at that and controlling the camera controls, because they were looking up, looking down. It wasn't like a normal sort of sweep like this. They were looking all over the place. So like I said, you can't unsee some of the things. I mean, I've looked at amusement parks. I've looked at people's entryways. It's just astounding. What do you use it for? Just look to see if any of your stuff is inadvertently leaking this kind of information, or, quite frankly, maybe your target. Maybe we can look at their cameras or their whatevers, or their industrial controls or their whatevers. So that's Shodan. Really interesting. Shodan has a competitor called Census.io. And so we use that to discover and monitor and analyze devices that are accessible from the internet, same with Shodan. So it will regularly check every single public IP, every single popular domain name, try to curate the information, try to come up with usable resulting data, and you can use an API to actively query it. Same thing with Shodan. So like Shodan, you can assess your network attack surfaces and discover new threats, determine global impacts. And so here's Census. And we can see here that we found an IP address. And right here, this is actually, this naming convention is on Amazon Web Services. And so this is a server that is available because they use the term compute. And it's in Europe, in West 1, and that's their data center. And it's in Ubuntu. And so we can even see that you can use SSH to connect to it. That's interesting. So remember what I said about cloud stuff making you vulnerable? This is it right here. This is somebody put an Ubuntu server on Amazon Web Services. And now whether or not you can break into the SSH service on it, I don't know. But here is a website that found it for you. So that's an example of just a few of the tools we can use to help with our footprinting.